Welcome to Faith, Reason, and Geekdom. I'm your genuflexer, Roger. My brothers and sisters in Christ, join me every week as we work out these three perspectives in our everyday lives. That's what I call Christian genuflexing. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I'm Roger, and today we have a special guest, Chad. We're going to talk about a lot of good things. We're going to hit it from the faith. We're going to hit it from the reason part. We're going to talk a little bit about his faith journey, and then we're going to talk about some things from church history that surprised him, some things from the reason side. So let's get right into the show. Once again, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Chad, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Chad. I'm a third-generation cradle atheist who was baptized 2 years ago. It's been a tremendous journey. Thank you for having me, Roger.
We met on Twitter. I've seen some of the stuff you post, and I enjoyed it and I liked it. So then I was like, hey, this guy would be really good to come on the podcast because I like his ideas and his sayings and his posts and his tweets and all that stuff like that. So I got in contact with you, and we made this happen. So again, appreciate it. I reverted. I'm a revert. In around when I was about 29 years old, I had a reversion. The first step was kind of like a intellectual. I had like something that happened to me deeply, but I'm very analytical and I'm very skeptical by nature. And so I was like, well, are there reasons for this faith that I have? Are there reasons? I just don't want to say, oh, this is coincidence. Oh, look at this. This good thing happened to me. I felt the presence of God. Like, to me, that wasn't enough. I'm an overthinker, analytical. So I was like, I need to investigate. So I started looking into all the arguments for God's existence, and it just blew me away. So that's what kind of brought me back. And then after that, then I had the more spiritual side, the more pastoral side, the more spiritual, the more the saints, reading the saints and prayer, learning how to pray. As Catholics, we weren't really taught. I didn't know anything about Christian meditations. I didn't know anything about Lectio Divina, Visio Divina, the Rose. I didn't know so many prayers, the litany of saints, the litany of humility. I mean, so many, the litany of trust, so rich, but I didn't know from my Catholic faith growing up. So that kind of blew my mind. And then the other level of getting in, a very slow journey. Again, those 5 or 6 years or so, very slow journey. And then now more of the communal, kind of being with other on fire Catholics, being with other people, doing the community, going, helping the poor. That's what I'm in the journey with right now. I'm still learning every day. So I kind of wanted to get your journey, Chad, if you would please grace us with that, a little bit about your story and about your faith turn and what got you to go on this path and continue to follow our Lord.
No, absolutely. So the whole process, it's sort of like when you meet somebody, make a new friend, and then you suggest, hey, why don't we play chess if you're that kind of geek? And I'm not the best at chess, but I'm solidly mediocre, I'd say. And so it's like when you're playing chess with somebody for the first time, you have no idea about them. And then you can tell immediately or almost immediately that you're playing with somebody infinitely better than you. And so in hindsight, it was God was playing a game of chess with me to get me in. And in hindsight, it's like, okay, I could see that move there. I could see that we were, so the board was set. We set up the board in 2011 or thereabouts. So I watched the TV series Brightheads Revisited, and then I read the book. And it's like, so I don't understand half of the references that seem to be internal Catholic, but this is something beautiful. But Christianity is silly, of course, because I'm an atheist. So I'm going to ignore that part and just enjoy the aesthetic. And so that's my first exposure to Catholicism. And for several years, I was just in the, okay, so I have to understand that Catholicism is different from what one understands Christians to be like and to believe in mainstream culture. Because I was going purely off of what the depictions that you find in culture, which are not flattering. Nobody's going to be surprised to hear that if you grew up atheist, all that you know about Christians is that they're weird. They don't use toothpaste. They don't wear shoes. They think that dinosaurs are a conspiracy. The whole works. Yeah. And so at that point, I understood that Catholicism had a different thing going on, but I wasn't curious. It was like, okay, well, that's a thing. It's different. I'll respect that a little bit more, but still crazy. And so flash forward a few years, I start meeting Christians. So I grew up in Austin, Texas, which is exactly, if you've heard of it, you know exactly what it's like. If you don't,
keep it weird.
Like yeah,
keep it weird.
Think Portland, Minneapolis, border Colorado, places like that. It's on that list. So I worked on a conservative political campaign because I was the worst kind of person. I was an atheist who was still a conservative, which is as a combo. Conservatives are fine, atheists are fine, but when you're a conservative atheist, there's something annoying going on. But I meet a ton of Christians, and I realize that Christians, interdenominationally, it's none of them are quite what you'd expect them to be based off of media presentation. And so that's a wall that falls down. And then go forward a few more years, I start reading. And my knock against Christianity, the reason why I wasn't even willing to give it a hearing, it's like, well, what about the Dark Ages? We had these Dark Ages, and then the arguments I'd hear about that is like, well, that wasn't really Christianity, which sounds stupid and fake, because if you've got something where it's 90% Christian, and it's horrible, then that seems like there's something wrong with Christianity. It sounded like people who say Soviet Union wasn't real communism. It's like, nah.
What is it? They call it the Scotsman fallacy, right? No good Scotsman.
Yeah. No true Scotsman. And so having the idea of, well, when people are Christian, then you have a Dark Age, so that must be bad. The Enlightenment must be good. Yada yada. Think normal. So I was never on Reddit, but think Reddit tier thinking. So then I started going into history. A lot of the history nerds that are listening to this will recognize what I'm saying when I say, if you're a history nerd, you know a lot about ancient Rome, and then you know a lot about World War II, and that in-between period is sort of a blank space.
Yeah, that's what I could find. That's very true.
Yeah. Which is fine, because those are genuinely interesting things. But when you start to look at the in-between period there, you start to fill in some of the contours. You might know American Revolution, but if you're history began in 1776, everything before that was a mistake, which I was. Then you pick up caricatures. You pick up weird ideas. You pick up, frankly, propaganda from various people throughout history writing about this era. When you study the medieval period, you find that it was not a dark age. You find that it was actually resplendent and bright. There was no dark age. That just never happened. But what you find is that you have a functional society that had great achievements, that had achievements that are different from ours. And you can definitely say, I don't want to go there in a time machine. Fair. But you had a functional society that was then destroyed by the Black Plague and then the Reformation. But the area before that, it's not dark. You can say that it's different. You can say that it's foreign.
One thing that makes me kind of like angry now that if you guys know who Thomas Madden is, I believe he teaches at University of St. Louis. He's done a lot of stuff, medieval scholastics, all that. And then there's this book called Thomas Wood's The Catholic Church Build Western Civilization. There's a sociologist that he wrote a book called Bearing False Witness. What's his name?
Rodney Stark, I believe.
Yeah, I was going to say Tony Stark. I was like, there's my geek brain right there, Tony Stark. Yeah, he had an arc reactor in his chest, and he powered his rope. No. Yeah, Rodney Stark. There you go. I was going to say Tony Stark. Yeah, Rodney Stark. And he's not Catholic. At first, he wasn't even Christian. He was agnostic, and then he converted to Christianity before... he wrote the book before his conversion to Christianity, but I think it's called Bearing False Witness, and then How the West Won. Yeah, it's called another book called How the West Won, and it talks about that. And I didn't know, and so whenever I hear like a historian or somebody says who their historian or somebody who talks about history and they're like, oh, the Dark Ages, I'm like, oh, I get like that's like a signal like, they might not know, because a lot of historians would say it was far from being the Dark Ages. I mean, so much of the inventions that came in, so much of the stuff. So that's a little clue. Whenever you hear the word Dark Ages, that's when I'm kind of like already with a grain of salt, whatever they're going to say. So yeah.
It's and I didn't convert through the Thomas Woods or the Rodney Stark books. They're good stuff. I didn't agree with everything, but they're solid stuff. I was at a secular university, and I had extra credits that I could take that weren't required. And it's like, okay, well, let's fill in this blank space. And so I'm in a secular class in a secular university getting the straight story, which is not 100% flattering. If this class had been perfectly flattering, it would have been to the church. That would have been a red flag. It was no, warts and all. Here's the bad things. Here's the good things. And it's like, well, okay, yeah, there are some bad things, but in context, like there are people who believe that the windmill and the watermill were invented in the 1700s. After we got rid of Christianity, people were rational. TM, trademark sign, copyright sign. The Enlightenment brought that. It's like, no. We had the technological advances of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
The pace is lower than it is today, but the Romans could not farm in northern France and in Germany. They did not have the technology to do that. And so it's the development of technology that created all of this. It's your civil structure was not, Christians did not cause the fall of Rome. You have all sorts of theories popping about. People say Christians did it, gay people did it, lead pipes did it. And it's like, well, none of these hold very much weight. Not many professional historians will take these seriously. They will take the lead pipes a little seriously, but realizing that the secularist propaganda is just not what the historians will say. It's like, okay, so the narrative that I had means that that I was buying propaganda from the internet and from the general culture. And every history nerd knows that when you watch a movie about a historical event, that it's going to be incredibly inaccurate.
Wait, are you saying that the History Channel and the internet is false? How dare you,
yes,
sir?
And Hollywood.
How dare you,
and
sir?
Hollywood.
How dare you?
So when you put aside media presentations of what the history is, and then you go to the normal academic drudge work of, okay, there's this, there's that, there's that. It turns out that the Middle Ages is not what people are led to believe. And then that meant that I had to come up with other reasons to not be Christian, which if you take the church's claims, then you treat them fairly. I mean, it's hard to do that. So one of the things that stuck with me as a problem is that if Christianity changes every century or two, if it said one thing this era, it says a different thing this era, and then it's going to say another thing in another era. Well, it doesn't sound to me like the word was made flesh and then built a church. If it's going to change its mind every few generations, that doesn't seem plausible. And so John Henry Newman helped, not because. So I was reading Newman before I believed in God, because it was like, okay, let's see. Apparently, they didn't change their mind on anything. Read Newman. It's like, okay, so the Catholic Church has never changed its mind on doctrinal issues. There are things that have changed, like priestly celibacy, but that's not doctrine. That's a discipline.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's real quick on that point. Yeah, there's a lot of misconception. They're like, no Catholic priests could get married. They're like, actually, yeah, Catholic. You're thinking of the Latin Rite, and there are many other just Catholic, Eastern Catholics or whatever Catholics that are married, and also too that's a discipline. Yes, that's not actually like a dogma, and to me that's a testament to the Holy Spirit. Right? Because for 2,000 years, 2,000 years, you would think something, and that's a testament. And going to the history, there's that one. She tried to force the Pope to do it. He wouldn't do it. She threw him in jail. They killed him, and then they put in their new Pope. And then she tried to force him to do the doctrine, and he's like, I can't. Like, he's like, I can't actually do that. No, wait a minute, you're my Pope. Like, I put you in, I killed the old Pope, and it's like, I put you in there, and he couldn't, like, for whatever reason. That's a testament, like, what you were saying is like, so, okay, look, if things change, then that's, easy argument. But you look at the 2,000 years, and you see it's not the case. Yeah.
And it's also I have an economics background. And so organizations do have to change if they're going to survive. And then I constantly see the church not changing, even when it would be really helpful for its survival to do so. And then it survives anyway. And then you see things like, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on Holy Mother Church, but it's not like they were just super confident and that's how this all worked out. This was the church is always being kind of on fire. I mean, the crisis today is bad, but it's not an unusual type of crisis for church history. We've always had problems. And we've gotten through them, and that's a testimony. We've not been run by the most competent people. If the United States were to fall tomorrow, and then the CIA is still operating, and they have supercomputers in a mountain that they're powering through civil disorder, it's like, okay, I understand how that works. But if the United States were to fall tomorrow and the DMV is still operating in 2,000 years, it's like, wait, what's going on here? This is crazy.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it was the story was Pope Vigilus. Vigilus. He was like in the sixth century. So that's a crazy story about that. Like they're trying to establish certain doctrines and stuff like that, and the other pope under the Goths, like they try to kill him and force the other one to put these doctrines in, and like I call it the Holy Spirit. It's like just stopped it from happening. So I think it's the Holy Spirit working through the church, like that happened like in the sixth century.
It's the consistency. It's not if you change your tune every 20 years, then whatever you're saying is not infallible truth, permanent. And the truth has to be permanent. Something can't be true one day and then false the next. Just not how it can work on a basic metaphysics level that you don't even have to be Catholic to accept that. But the fact that they are consistent, that they sing the same tune the entire 2,000 years. Now you find the Protestant sects change tunes on various things. Let's dunk on the Episcopalians particularly. It's like I can't understand why somebody would be an Episcopalian, because if truth changes, if truth is malleable, then you have no certainty in anything. You can be an atheist and believe that you found something that will never change, and you can be a Catholic and you can say that you found something that will never change. But all the other ideas, I don't see a middle ground that is coherent.
Yeah, man, that's definitely true. It's and again, look, to read his church history is to cease being Protestant.
Oh, so that was Newman, in fact. So
yes.
So Newman said that, and he also talked about there's not really a middle ground between Catholicism and atheism. Any other thing that you have just falls apart, because either the truth is unchanging, or it's not the truth.
So you're just saying is that kind of helped you push your faith, is learning, taking those classes, doing the research, figuring out, wait a minute, this is pretty strange that this is like the oldest establishment, right? Currently, like there's no other establishment other than the Catholic Church that is still standing, So that, to me, from a purely historical, and I would even say scientific, because archaeology or history is a kind of a science, definitely. So because people are like, I want evidence. Well, this 2,000-year-old, miracle, like surprisingly miracle, this church is still established, and after 2,000 years, how many Goths and the Napoleon and the communism and
Vikings. The Vikings got off light. Yeah, the Vikings were bad guys. I don't like the recent rehabilitation. The Vikings weren't so bad. It's like, no. Vikings bad.
Did you see what's the one that they used to do where they used to take your lungs out, like behind your back or something, and like while you're still like breathing, and your lungs would like be exposed? That was like brutal, man. Like that's crazy.
Yes. And one of the points that people make for a dark age is, well, why don't we have manuscripts? It's like, well, because every monastery, all but 4 monasteries in the entirety of Europe. This is a place thick with monasteries. So you've got thousands of monasteries getting burned down on basically a 50-year cycle. So every 50 years you burn it down, and you start with the library because it's got the most paper, so it makes the biggest fire. And so it's like, why didn't we well, it was dark because nobody wrote anything. It's like, no, we wrote, it just got burned by the Vikings. So it's not even a particularly illiterate period. They wrote less than we do today, but they didn't have Twitter. So what we write today as tweets is not quite comparable to writing out by hand copies of manuscripts.
Definitely. And see, another point that I wanted to make real quick is also people realize about, we were just saying about books and manuscripts, is like, man, they are very expensive to produce. Very, very expensive. And I think that's one thing that I told in this one debate that I had. I mentioned about like what sola scriptura or like, the Bible, like, well, if Jesus wanted the means, like, how do you follow Christ? Is it a church or is it just a Bible that wasn't like fully contended? The canon wasn't around during Jesus' day and his apostles after he died. There wasn't the full canon as we have now. I would ask, well, how do we get that canon? Also, I would say is like, the printing press wasn't invented until way later, right? Like in the 15th or 16th century, and like if Jesus wanted us to just have the Bible and the Bible alone, you would think, right, that at least he would have waited 1,500 years later or so to have that. And the church didn't have just Bibles ready; those were expensive. They didn't just have them like, oh, we could just hand out the Bibles and everybody that. And again, the literacy rate isn't what it is now, and it's like, oh, the second century, everybody just have their Bible. Third century, everybody. So yeah, what you're talking about, like, and it was very hard to copy the manuscripts. And again, another. A testament to the Bible of how accurate. I forgot what the numbers are, but some real like statistical research were saying that these manuscripts from different parts of the world back then, thousands of years ago, from different parts of the world, they're like literally 90-something% accurate, and the things that are changed are literally minuscule. They're minuscule. Nothing changes the actual ideas. To me, that's another testament, because how hard it is and expensive to copy manuscripts.
It's this entire process was this is incredibly laborious, and so when people say, illiterate, it's like, well, people will say, well, Roman society was more literate than medieval society. It's like, not really. In Rome, it was even more or just as difficult, you could say, to produce books. But in Rome, you had the slaves write them, and whereas in the medieval ages, you had monks writing them. So one, you can chew on that a bit. It's a fun thought. And two, most Romans could only read the graffiti on the walls. Getting to knowing enough reading so that you can read graffiti is not that literate. And so medieval ages had everyone could sort of read the graffiti in the same way, but it's not particularly different. So the very rich in Rome stopped existing when the empire fell. But that's the main difference. And so you might not have the odd millionaire who can just give a ton of money to a poet to write a poem. Instead of having a centralized empire, you have diffuse kings, each of whom is poor because you only have, let's say, a quarter of France as your domain, rather than the emperor having all of the empire. That's really the only difference. Standards of life went up through this period for most people. Agricultural output skyrocketed, both through technological advance and better techniques and bringing new land under cultivation. And this was led by the monasteries. It was the monks want to be away from civilization, so they go out into the woods, they clear land, and they start growing crops. And then all of a sudden, people move in and build a town because it's a nice area. And it's like, got to move back. The monks are like, oh, now we've got people. Now we have to start a new monastery even farther out in the wilderness. So on a geekdom point, because we can't leave out the geekdom, I'm fully convinced that the best way to colonize space would be to have more vocations, and then you have a Benedictine monastery on Mars. And then that's just how we do this.
You know what? I wanted, because I'm trying to, like, I'm horrible procrastinator, so horrible. I started writing, like, I just got like a few pages of like a story, other than that one, I wanted to write a science fiction story. And there are stories similar to that, like where like a priesthood in space, you know what I mean? Like going to Mars. And so, I'm not the first one to think about that, but I like, interesting that you said that, because I always thought about that would be so interesting. I want to see that. I want to see like a clergy or priesthood or something established, a monastery established in a story about science fiction. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
It fits the historical pattern so well. So we'll do a little Laudato Si as well. People talk about the environment under capitalism, and there are various things that one can say, and everyone's got their opinions, and they've got things that they can read besides me talking about it. But the interesting thing is that the monasteries in Germany before the Reformation had land control. They had land management, fisheries management, woods management, husbandry, in the most sustainable way that I've encountered before. And so what they do is that, so the church owns the forest. And so they take down, we want this to last forever. And so this is how much wood that you can get out of it every year. And then you have to replant here and here. This is how we're going to get the forest. We're going to cut down the low branches so that we can run cattle and pigs through the forest to sort of eat the leaves, eat the livestock, eat the roots, eat the acorns. And then, so you have this sustainable thing. You have the fisheries where you have certain quotas what you can get out of it. You have everything managed in a way. You have crop rotation. You have everything managed sustainably by the monastery, because the monastery understands itself to live forever, and there's no reason to be too profitable. And so you have sustainable development before the Reformation. And the Reformation comes along, and then they're like, no, we're going to do all of it now. So you get overfishing, you get overgrazing, you get deforestation. And so a lot of these problems didn't exist beforehand. They came with the dissolution of the monasteries. You lost a huge cultural force for good, because they had the longest term perspective. They aren't a multinational corporation. I mean, technically they're a multinational corporation of the time, but they were sustainable. They weren't beholden to shareholders. They were beholden to God and to their successors. And so we have this different model that existed and throve, basically until greedy monarchs decided that Luther had a point. So let's seize all the gold and all the land and all the property.
That's crazy how learning about that is how when coming to all that, when the monastery is taking over and stuff, they looked. I think it's in the book Rodney Stark had wrote that the areas that were deeply sympathetic to the Protestants. Just so happened the monasteries like, well, yeah, the church doesn't have authority. Let's take it. And when it was the other way around, it was the other way around. So it's very political. The monasteries getting greedy and stuff like that. Yeah. So I definitely see that. I do think we need more monasteries, more like that, more orders that would be flourishing, like what you're talking about, monasteries. And also I tell my friend, brother Brandon, he's a Franciscan, and I tell him, I was like, man, you know what? I love being married, my vocation. That's what God gave me, my vocation to my children and all that. But I was like, in another life, man, I would love to be in like the monastery, an order, whether it be, to me, it would either be like, I don't know, the Dominicans or the Jesuits, one of those, probably the Dominicans. But I do like the Franciscans too. But like, but I was like, I would love to be like, imagine like not a James Bond, but like a I don't know, like a smooth, cultured man traveling around the world. I'm probably describing this, and some of the brothers in the orders like, oh, it is not like that. But like, I imagine myself going to Rome, studying in the libraries of Rome, and then going to the Middle East and just like studying all day and praying. That just like, to me, that was like, oh my goodness, having some good wine in Italy and studying theology, and then the next minute I'm in America and in the Rocky Mountains, and I'm praying and meditating, and I'm just jet flying. And some of the brothers are like, oh, good thing you didn't come into the order, because it's not like that. But I have this fantasy of that life, and that's a broken nature part of me is like, oh man, it would be so awesome to be in an order and community and pray and just read all day, like, and again, I know it's not like that, but yeah, monasteries, man. I think we could do that. Vocations, because we're hurting for vocations for the church. So we should, anyone pray, definitely pray for vocations. So your faith journey kind of led you this way, and what do you do now to keep that going? What do you do now to sustain?
I frequent the sacraments, which is the first thing, and it sounds very basic, but it's sort of you can't say it often enough. And the next thing is that when I pray, I'm usually opening up the Psalms, and then I'm just read the Psalm aloud, say a glory be, and then read another Psalm, and do that as much as you like. You can get through all the Psalms in a few hours a day. I'm not going to say that I've done that at any point regularly. I think I had one time where I just read all the Psalms in a day, and it was awesome. And if you have the time, I recommend anybody to do that once. But it is a lot. But my prayer life is mainly the Psalms and the Rosary. Because it's what you get in the Psalms, and you find something new every time you go through them. You're finding a dialogue of the Father with the Son, of the Son with the Father. You're finding an internal dialogue of the Trinity in most of the Psalms. Other ones are different things. Other ones are different laments. David doing commentary on what his situation is, but that's not different from what Christ's situation was on the cross. You have our Lord citing the Psalms throughout the Gospels and on the cross. O God, why hast thou forsaken me? Is the opening line to a psalm. And you can read that psalm, and then you find in the psalm, it's sort of prophetic about what's happening to Christ. It's like, in the psalm, it ends up with they've dug my hands and my feet. They can count all my bones, but I'm still going to trust in God. And so you find all of these references, and then after a while, you start. The slightly cheesy way of putting it is, after you've read the Psalms, you've gone through them enough, they get written on your heart. And I think that's something that's been very fruitful for me. Just constantly revisiting the Psalms, going through the Psalms, and getting them in a point where if somebody quotes a Psalm, I can't tell you what number it is, but I'll recognize that they're referencing a Psalm. So I'm not great yet.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's the Psalms and getting through and putting yourself in that situation as well. Like you're saying, hey, I'm going to carve out this time. You got to make time for prayer.
Yes, it's I talk to people, and nothing against them because we've all been here. But it's I'll pray sporadically when I find a few minutes, and that can work and that can happen. But it's going to happen a lot. It's not going to happen every day. It might happen a few times a week, and praying every day. It doesn't have to be a ton. It doesn't have to be a dramatic thing. You don't have to go to adoration, but a psalm a day. And some of these psalms are really short. One of them takes. One of them is. One in particular is not short. It's 176 verses. So if you want to read, so that one's actually really cool. Because it's broken up into 22 sections. And in Hebrew, each section has 8 lines that each start with the same letter. And so this psalm was something that David wrote to teach the alphabet to Solomon. And it's like, okay, cool.
Because that's a lot. That's very Catholic of you. Like, I mean, anyone wants to do any Catholic praying, read that's 100 and something song. That'd be very Catholic. Very. What I do is Wednesdays are my. Usually I try to make a point to go to adoration because like the classical like Wednesdays and Fridays fasting and so that's what I try to do. That's where I do the rosaries on the Friday and then the Wednesdays adoration. So I wanted to also speak a little bit about the point. I know you talked about the history and stuff like that, which I mean I love history too. I'm very interested in history and all that. But I guess something else that we didn't talk about in our first half of the conversation, is there anything else other than that we talked about that surprised you or that you're interested in about church history? Because like again, not many people know that about the Pope Vigilus. If you hear them, that story about the Empress Theodora trying to implement the Empress Theodora's like heresies, and he just couldn't. And finally, at the end, he just backed down, stood his ground, and said, "No, actually, I changed my mind." And to me, I was like, "Whoa, that's crazy! That's the Holy Spirit working." So that surprised me, But is there anything else?
The one that I meditate on the most, the thing that comes to mind is Pope St. Gregory the Great. The man who doesn't want to be Pope. He just wants to be a monk. And then the Pope's like, no, we need you. There is no one else. You've got basically civilizational failures happening. You aren't getting that many talented people educated. And so it's like, well, you'd like to, you have, Pope Gregory is originally, he's a rich kid who decides, no, being a rich kid's not for me. I'm just going to go to the monastery. But he's so educated. And he's so talented that the Pope's like, okay, I hope you've enjoyed the monastery for 6 months. Now I've got a job for you. And so he keeps trying to go back, but the world won't let him because we need his talents. And then he's elected Pope during a plague. And the Roman armies are dissolving after briefly touching Italy again. You've got basically social chaos. And the only thing that can step in and provide order is the church. So think after all of these natural disasters. So whether it's anything that happens in Texas, we have HEB there as the most functional thing still going.
During the pandemic, HEB was like, we're like, all right, everybody stay home, everybody do this, everybody that. And HEB was still open. It's like, HEB definitely stay open. So I understand that reference.
Yeah. And we can look at Walmart after Katrina back in 2005. Walmart was doing more than FEMA was because you've got societal collapse happening, but Walmart is powering through and kind of saving the day. Not that I'm a fan of Walmart, but that happened. It objectively happened. And so what the church did under Pope St. Gregory was the church didn't want power. He didn't want to be Pope, but you had civilizational failure. And the only thing that could govern and that could provide these services, that could provide food, was the church. And so this is the origin of the papal states. The papal states happened because there was a void which no one else could fill. And so there was no ambition, there was no lust for power. There's none of that. It's just, we are what's left. We are the only ones who can do this. And so we're thrust into this.
Yep. Isn't that like how the church operates? It's like whenever there's and I think I heard somebody say too, or talked about, like, whenever there's horrible things going on in the churches, like, look how many saints they produced, you know? And the church steps up to that because it like you said, fills a void, you know, fills that void. And Saint Gregory the Great, this is a great saint. I mean, even was it John Calvin? Even John Calvin like admired him, and he was like, oh yeah. So it's incredible that the church could even reach people that are, like, you know, anti-Catholic and not really too fond of the church, but even they could see, like, okay, hey, this is a great man, and, you know, Saint Gregory the Great. It's like awesome. Like, I mean, so much stuff, so much strife that happened during his time. You know what I mean? Like, you're dealing with all this different elements, different, even physical, you know, the plagues and all this stuff, and then to come out, and then of course, you know, the Gregorian chants. It's like beautiful. Like, yeah, I wish we hear that more in churches and stuff like that. It's like, like international law. Like, where did we get that from? Like the Catholic Church, like international law. People don't realize where we got all this stuff, you know. And then also in a broader sense.
It's fun because even in the 20th century, so you think, okay, so the Catholic Church in the 20th century, not that big a deal in the world, right? Like, nope. So
architecture.
Well, it's both the European Union and the United Nations were both. The Catholic Church supported both, and a man instrumental to both of them is a guy called Jacques Maritain, who is he's a big deal. If you haven't heard of him, Jacques Maritain. A very important Catholic thinker in the 20th century. You don't have to agree with everything that he says. People will argue. But this is still a guy who, as a layman, was offered being made a lay cardinal, the first one in 200 years. And even people who don't agree with him are like, yeah, he kind of deserved it, yeah. And so he wrote a lot of the founding documents. Like the UN Charter on Human Rights is a document heavily influenced by the Catholic Church. We didn't write it, but we wrote a huge portion of it. We looked at both of these things and thought, we need a Christian society. Now, the problem that we ran into was that we said, maybe we can give Christianity without calling it Christian. Maybe we can not say anything at all and just give them Christian values and people will go with it. And so that's why it hasn't worked. But
that's and like the Nuremberg trials and all the, you know, the Nazi trials. Because if you think about this, like, if everything's relative, what I tell relativists, you know, a lot of, not all of them are, but I kind of find it hard not, if you can, because again, if there's no God, then there is literally no truth, everything's relative. They say, like, you know, like, you know, I could just do whatever I want, and if that's true, or things can change, well, then slavery wasn't really wrong. It was just you disagree with it. And then what the Nazis did wasn't really wrong. It was just you could just disagree with it, you know. So that's the most you can do, is just disagree with them. You can't really point to something. And again, when we say rights, American, we have rights. Well, what is a right? You know, like, what is a right, and where does it come from? Why do we, you know, people say, oh, there's rights to this, we have rights to that. Well, what is a right? And I think a lot of atheists might they do benefit, either they like it or not. They benefit from a Christian culture, because a lot of them, like, where do we get these, you know, like the argument for morality? And they're like, oh, we're just born with it, or we're just it's always right. I was like, well, where did you get that? Even if your grandparents weren't quote unquote Christians, they still benefited from a Christian society. The world has benefited from the Christian society, and you just, like, take the name away, like you said, and just say, oh, well, it's obvious that we shouldn't do this, and it's obvious. Well, where did you get that? Even if you don't, and you don't have to, because a lot of people, and I'm not saying you have to, but a lot of people, like, atheists will make a straw man. They make the straw man fallacy and be like, oh, are you saying that you have to believe in God to be good? No, I'm very good. I know atheists are, no, that's a straw man. That's not what we're saying, that you have to believe in a God. But those intrinsic values, those intrinsic truths come from somewhere.
Like Douglas Murray talks about, he doesn't personally believe, but it would be a good thing if everyone believed. And it's like, a part of that's just weird, and so got to pray for the guy. but it's I can see his point.
Yes, I definitely, yeah, you could see the point, even if you don't have to, agree with it and all this different stuff. But yeah, I think this is very true. And so there's and one thing that kind of made me kind of angry and bitter is like, when I was growing up in Catholic school, all we did was getting cotton balls and glues and just glued them onto paper maches and stuff like that. Like we didn't learn. And again, I understand. I do get like, you maybe not the best thing or the thing to get, what do you call it? Like, 6-year-olds and say, okay, now 6-year-olds, you international law and all of Francis Bacon and George Demetrius. I understand that in a way, but like, come on, even in middle school, even in confirmation, we're older. I didn't really get any of that. I didn't know any of that until later. Until I took it upon myself to prompted by the Holy Spirit, I believe, and God's grace prompt me to that, lead me toward him, raise me up and all men will follow towards me. I'll draw all men closer to me. Yes. So him doing that, God's grace, but me going and looking for it, studying this, looking into it. But you don't just get that nonchalantly. George Demetrius, the father of the Big Bang Theory, like a lot of Christians would say, wait a minute, we can't, like evolution, the church said, of course, in light of God, always through God. But that evolution, if that's true, like, okay, we can believe in that. We're not 6,000 year old, that we believe, the earth is just 6,000 years old. People don't know that. People don't, they literally don't know that. They don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like the kids who grow up in Christianity see the media depictions of Christianity and they think it's true, which is a huge catechetical failure. I'm not blaming my parents who had this happen.
Boomers. It's all the boomers. It's all the baby boomers. The sexual resident. I'll just play. That's all of us.
Yeah, we didn't have these huge apostasy rates in the past, and so if you didn't think that was possible, I'd say you made a mistake. But I'm not. I won't hold it against somebody who didn't think that modernity, like what we have right now, is possible. If they just didn't think that was on the horizon. They didn't discern well, but I'm not mad at them because how many times do I discern poorly?
Yes. Yeah. Very true. Even though Pope Paul, even though he warned, like when he talked about contraception and he talked about like what it's going to lead to and treat women like just bodies, and he very prophetic. If you ever just type in, Pope Paul's sexuality teachings or whatever, like things will pop up. He was very prophetic, and there was other prophetic people, but like overall, it was too much of, I think, like a lax and changing things and making things where people kind of like, oh, it's just like any other church. And I miss the ancient. I miss that ancient, the bells and smells and all that stuff, the Gregorian chants and, all this stuff. People yearn for something ancient other than just, regular church, because again, I can get regular music from other places. I can get other cool talks from a TED Talk or Jordan Peterson, but where is that actual ancient, that this is a 2,000-year-old, this is Jesus, this is God, this is in Eucharist, for my local church, like teaching like 6th, 7th, 8th graders, the middle school catechesis and stuff. So in the CCD class, I heard one of the students would say, he was like, so what is it like? So is it like this? Like we're Christians and like the other people believe in science. And I just was like, oh my goodness, no. And I was like, but it was like towards the end of class, I was like, we got to talk about this. Because he was like, oh, so the other people just believe in science and we're Christians, so we don't, right? And you don't know how many people, even atheists, grown atheists, 30-year-old men would like, I'll talk to them and they're like, I was like, yeah, science this. I love science. Science is good. And they're like, wait. But you're a Christian. You can't. What do you mean? You can't believe in science. You gotta hate it. I was like, what? He's like, yeah. You can't be for science. I was like, are you kidding me? Do you know Francis Bacon, all these other people, Pascal, mathematician and philosopher, like do you know all these people? Like, no, it's crazy. So that's another topic. But I think I could go on for another 2 hours. But we'll wrap up this show. So I just kind of want to wrap it up with this. Any last things you wanted to say? Anything, either your the faith journey or anything surprising, little quick things before we wrap up this.
So I was never that preoccupied with science versus religion. That's just not an angle that ever gave me trouble. But it was incredibly interesting to find that as somebody who grew up atheist, and then encountering other people who describe themselves as non-religious or atheist, hearing them talk about science and then they don't know much science. It's I'm not trying to be uncharitable, and I don't think I am, but it's that people have funny ideas about science without having done science.
Are you alluding to like when people say believe the science, and then you're like, oh, a man could get pregnant or a man could menstruate, or believe the science? Oh, it's not a human, because that's what I'm thinking.
Well, that's certainly true, but I thought this well before the insanity of the last, let's say, 5 years. It's if you want to talk about evolution. And then if you drop the term devolution or de-evolution, it's like, well, that's not really a thing. If people talk about no, science disproves God, but they don't know, they don't understand that these are not rivalrous claims; they're claims about different things. It's like if I were to say garlic is good, and they were to say no, paprika is good. It's like, well, look, I mean, these aren't comparable claims.
Yeah, God is not in the world, per se. He's outside time and space, and so he's not a material. You're looking in the wrong thing. You're trying to look for a different object of metal or whatever on the beach. The analogy of the beach, the metal detector. You're using the wrong tool. Now, science, I believe, definitely points to a God, as the some would say design, the design or the intelligent design, whether it be the moon and our gravity and like things like math to me, that alludes to something because it's not a physically material object. But I would say science definitely points to that, but you're using the wrong tool per se.
And the final thought will be, as an atheist, I disbelieve in the Big Bang Theory because this is just a math argument for God. If you want to be an atheist and you want to be consistent, you can't believe that, there was a Big Bang that happened. It's like, no, you have to subscribe to some version of the universe always existed.
Because
if it didn't exist,
Because if you do, it was just weird because in the beginning when I was not Christian, a lot of atheists would cling to the Big Bang Theory. Like, Big Bang Theory proves there's no God. Big Bang Theory proves no God. And I guess some of the other like slightly smarter ones are like, wait a minute. Uh-oh. Wait, we can't subscribe to that. So now atheists are like, nah, I don't believe that. But when growing up in the 90s, I was born in the late 80s, but in the 90s and early 2000s, I remember atheist high school people, they used to always cling to, Big Bang Theory proves there's no God. And now I see a shift now, I guess, thank God to the apologetics that, like Trent Horn and what's his name? Dr. William Lane Craig. Now atheists are seeing the error of that and like, because again, it goes the cosmological argument, like whatever begins to exist, not whatever exists must have a cause. That's where people get it wrong. It's like, but it goes whatever begins to exist, must have a cause. But also too quick, Aquinas, that's why I like his way too, because on his ways it's different from the cosmological, which like Dr. William Lane Craig is the most famous one that prescribes to that currently. It shows that the universe had a beginning, therefore God exists, but the Thomas Aquinas actually works whether the earth or the universe is eternal or not. And I think the Aquinas way is much stronger because it works either way. Even if science would say like, actually we were wrong, the universe is eternal, Aquinas's way, a version of that argument still works. So I like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah. It's I mean, the whole thing is a sort of it's probably true. I don't have the math to say that I believe in the Big Bang Theory. And frankly, if somebody doesn't have a physics master's degree, you're not entitled to an opinion. It's too complicated. But that this was a tactic that's like, okay, no, actually, here's the math that says God exists. And then atheists are like, the math says God doesn't exist. So it's always been amusing.
Yeah, the gymnastics have been amusing to see, try to like wiggle out of this one. Like, I was like, science shouldn't tell us what to do any more than the telephone should tell us what to say. Is like when philosophy, that's why you need philosophy. You need philosophy, not just pure science, because like, let's just do what the science says. Well, that I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. What do you mean just do what the science says? The science is not like, if you implement anything, it's philosophy. So it's not just pure science. And then also too, like I I just find it like, again, I think that's the most, right now, that's the most prevalent theory. You know, the multiverse, whatever. Even if there was, that still doesn't work. It just kicks the bucket down. Well, then what created the multiverse? There still has to be, so that doesn't solve it. But I notice a lot of people are trying to. But right now, as the overwhelming majority, right now, the most prevailing theory is the Big Bang Theory. And if that's true, that the universe began to exist, you know, well, how? They must have a cause. And then so that, they try to wiggle out of that one. So, but man, this was a great episode.
Absolutely.
I have a feeling I'm going to have you back on for many, many more, because there was like 10 subjects we could have just did a whole show on by itself. But I love talking to you, and I actually enjoyed this. Really excellent to nerd out on these things. So
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Roger, and that is Chad. Thank you for joining Faith, Reason, and Geekdom. Please listen to us, share us with your friends, and Godspeed.